couple of months ago, I was having a conversation with John Irving. Isn't that the way you want to begin sort of every story? He was in town, and we did an event with him, and he was talking about age, actually, and his own age, and the fact that he had 3 ideas for his next novel, but in terms of how long it takes him to write a novel, he felt an immense pressure to choose the right idea because, you know, who knows whether he'd get to write 3. So I want to put this to you, and I'll start with you, Claudia. You must have a lot of ideas and possibilities that run through your mind. I mean, as writers, you're looking at the world and you're wondering, is that a story? Is that a novel? Is that something? With this one, do you remember when it grabbed you, this idea, and what it was back then, the genesis, and how it took over and took you into this adventure of the book?
Yes, there were 2 elements. First, I remember reading the story of Romeo Dallaire being found drunk in a park in Hull, and it coming out that he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and he'd been the general of the UN peacekeeping mission to Rwanda. And something about his response struck me as so human and so fundamentally human in the face of atrocity. And I felt an instant kinship and empathy with him. And I was really drawn imaginatively to create a character like him. Second to that, post 9/11, post Rwanda, and the conflicts that have come since then, I had a very strong reaction to the rhetoric that was bandied around by our media and politicians, in which there was this supposition that it was only the other side that was really committing atrocities. It's only in Africa that genocides like that with machetes could happen. Even, you know, conflicts in the Middle East, there's this underpinning assumption that it's only those people who can really do things like that. And from doing the research for the reconstruction, in which I really studied human evolution and the behaviors that are common with chimpanzees and gorillas, I understood that war and genocide are behaviors that are fundamentally human. They are something that is common to all of us across our culture, across our ethnicity, and they arise out of certain circumstances. So I really wanted to write with this book a character and a story of a genocide that was on our side and our team, and create a character who was a decent man who was nonetheless involved, to get past the kind of self-righteousness that really bothers me in our media.
Lovely. I think that was the whole premise behind Breaking Bad, was that no, they created a character who through circumstance had to make choices and made increasingly wrong choices, and a good person became somebody very morally compromised. So, not saying you stole from Breaking Bad or anything. Yeah. The microphone. The question is genesis. Out of the ideas swimming around, why grab this? Why?
Well, actually, I have very few ideas, and so I work them for
You take the only one that comes along.
Exactly. I take the only one. Yeah. In fact, this novel has been in my mind in some variations for about 30 years. In my early 20s, when I was at university, I started working on a novel set in Portugal, and it didn't come to life because I didn't know how to write a novel. I was too immature as a human being and as a writer, certainly, to write a novel. But it did feature some illusory high mountains. It did feature some villagers. It did feature an animal, a talking dog. But it didn't come to life, so I put it aside. And then about 20 years later, when I went to India, as I mentioned in Life of Pi, I went to India meaning to work on a novel set in Portugal. It was that Portuguese novel. And once again, I didn't know how to do what I was doing, what I was trying to do. So once again, I put it aside. And finally, it was only after writing Beatrice and Virgil that I finally came to understand what I was trying to do, and it finally sort of came together. One of the things that I've started doing as a writer is just putting elements that I don't think will go together well and seeing what happens. So Life of Pi, there's theology and zoology. Beatrice and Virgil was an animal allegory on the Holocaust. In this one, as I said, I put elements that you wouldn't think would go well together. So that's in a sense what gave me this was the spark of life for this one. But otherwise, I don't really have. I mean, sometimes ideas just pop in my head. Usually, it's a very single idea. Like I already have an idea for another novel, and I just thought of it about 2 weeks ago when I was in Amsterdam. It has nothing to do with Amsterdam. I happened to be in Amsterdam, and I happened to reading Homer's Iliad. I'd never read the Iliad. And it's an amazing book. You mentioned Game of Thrones.
It stood up.
Yeah, but you mentioned Game of Thrones. Well, the Iliad is like Game of Thrones, minus the sex, but certainly copious amounts of violence. And yet it's extraordinarily effective. It's not just gratuitous violence like we specialize in nowadays. It's this really keenly felt violence. And it's all centered on anger. It's a work that's profoundly anchored in the emotion of anger, which is a very human emotion, and certainly a very contemporary one. So I suddenly had this little idea for a novel. And what often with me is a single idea will pop into my head and I'll think about it. And the key fork in the road is whether it's a viable novelistic idea or just an anecdote. And then that's sort of the fork in the road. And if it seems to be novelistic, then I start doing research. And it's my research that usually tends to give me more ideas. Because then I discover something from that particular lens that will lead me further on to do more research, which will give me more ideas. And I sort of zigzag my way between ideas and research until I get something together.